Here we are again with the big safety short. We have Dave Rebbitt with us, CEO of Rarebit Consulting. We are going to be talking about the value of the safety professional. So grab a coffee and let's get going.
Join us on the Big Safety Short as we explore the dynamic landscape of safety prevention and performance in high-risk industries, uncovering groundbreaking insights and solutions that safeguard workers and redefine safety standards for the future.
Hi everyone, welcome back to the show. Today we have Dave Rebbitt back with us. Last episode we were talking about the Supreme Court decision and the City of Sudbury. Today we're going to be talking about the value of the safety professional. And Dave, I know this was part of your thesis with your MBA. It's something that I've heard more and more frequently these days, sometimes in more of a derogatory fashion. I've heard safety professionals compared to the registries. What's the difference between a safety professional and having an A on, one of the registries? And oftentimes, like you, I get contacted by organizations looking for somebody to fulfill a safety role, a director or vice president, and saying, but I don't want those type of people that's with us. So I find this fascinating because obviously there's a role to play, an important role. They make sure people go home at the end of the day and property is protecting the environment. What's happening here? Like from your point of view, why is this becoming more of an opinion? What's happened?
Well, I think we need to really define what is a safety professional and what is the value they bring to an organization. Let's unpack value first. When we think about a value or a value proposition, I'll give you the example of McDonald's. The value proposition of McDonald's is when you order a Big Mac, whether you're in Canada or Hungary or China, that Big Mac is the same. You know exactly what to expect. That's their value proposition. They're going to give you a reasonable price hamburger, and it's always going to be the same. So what do safety professionals deliver as a value to an organization? And of course, it's something similar to, maybe a bit of legal advice, but keeping the organization safe, managing risk. And so, is that the real value proposition? Is that the value proposition that is seen by the C-suite? And in a lot of cases, they have very different ideas. And of course, I struggled in my thesis to define, what was a safety professional, and so I started with the term of practitioner. So someone who works in health and safety, full-time, part-time, delivering frontline service, a practitioner. A safety professional I defined as someone who is, part of a framework. Part of an organization that gives out a really recognized or registered designation, so a right to title designation. So that would be, in Canada, CRSP, in the US, a CSP, and of course in the UK would be a grad IOSH. So, when we talk about, safety professionals and hiring into these I guess, more senior positions, that requires a whole different skill set. That is not going around doing inspections or doing incident investigations. That requires a whole different skill set. And so safety professionals really are not that well equipped for these roles. And they tend to become problem identifiers rather than solution providers. And what I mean by that is, and you commented on, well, they say we don't want a certain kind of people, because a lot of times health and safety people come into the organization and they have this mistaken belief that they're supposed to create a total safety culture, or they're supposed to create some kind of a safety culture and they're supposed to change things, when really senior management doesn't want that. They want someone who's going to manage the safety system, in a credible sort of way. But these new people who come into the organization often suddenly decide things are a problem, and they create often their own problems, and they write that story. There's a huge problem, I'm going to fix it. We're going to focus a lot of resources on this, and the department really can lose focus over that. So
you hit on a couple of interesting points with that, Dave. One is the whole safety culture construct side of things there. And I mean, when we look at how our safety professionals are educated, through the various universities and getting the CRSP designation that's with it, don't see an awful lot of stuff that provides them with the skills or knowledge to actually, help influence creating a safety culture that's there. The other side that I hear from all this, though, it's almost like safety overpromised and failed to deliver at the fundamental level. Because what I hear from, again, our C-suite executives is, you promise me, less turnover, better business, more corporate citizenship, right? Better morale and less incidents. And I haven't received what you've delivered on. And my incident rates, certainly the ones that count are serious injuries and fatalities, have actually increased. So it's almost like, we have an education problem coupled with, an over-promise, fail to deliver problem that's happening with it. And again, your thesis, which was looked at, Alberta, it was one part of it came out, is highest number of safety professionals, greatest spend, worst performance, so like, really?
Well, I think, winding the clock back, you look at why did the safety profession, even start in North America? And it started to prevent workplace fatalities. That was the focus. And it's been very successful in doing that. Workplace fatalities are way, way down from the turn of the 20th century. But as fatalities have shrunk, then it's become about other things, and because when you have such a small, number of fatalities, and it is small these days, let's face it, then, what are you looking at? What are you doing? And because you don't have these huge events that are going to drive, the next step. So, the C-suite expects that you're going to, as a health and safety professional, manage a program that's going to deliver good results. And the problem is, how do you do that? You've got all the pieces in place, and it looks like it's going okay, and then suddenly there's this terrible incident. And so one of the things I found, which really surprised me in my thesis, was that I compared the number of health and safety professionals and benchmarked that against a fatality rate in various provinces in Canada. And I found that the number of health and safety professionals did have an effect on the fatality rate. It resulted in a lower fatality rate, but the number of practitioners, the number of people working in health and safety, didn't affect it at all.
Right.
So I guess some education is better than no education, but there is more practitioners than there are professionals.
Right.
And that really kind of gives a little bit of a window into why it is that Canada has such poor performance internationally.
Overall, which, I mean, we talked about that in some of the previous episodes that are here, but it's almost like you look at it, and I agree, from where we started, we've seen a good decrease that is there. Some people might question whether or not that's just the Hawthorne effect, the fact that we're paying attention to it. But there's no doubt that we've almost gotten diminishing returns, or are we eroding our programs through some of that stuff that you talk about with hyper-compliance. Because where we see this through the International Labour Organization statistics, where shockingly in 2013, a worker was dying on the job every 15 seconds. 2019 is now every 10 seconds on the job. And of course, it's like 11 times, 10 times, that number are being seriously injured or killed. So we're trending in the wrong direction. That's why when we look at it, have we reached our limitations of effectiveness? Do we need new paradigms, which is what the American Society of Safety Professionals is looking for? So it goes back to tying into not only just the education, but also some of the push that's happening here with being certified as a professional with it, much like psychologists might be. And I know there's a big push in Alberta on that side as well. So interested in your thoughts on that.
Well, I think there isn't new paradigms or new approaches needed, because the traditional safety system or safety program, it works. There's no question that stuff works, but I think it has, as you say, reached the limit of effectiveness. It's no longer really improving safety. It's just sort of maintaining a certain level. And our workplace today is changing, and it's changing quickly, and there's a different dynamic as well in the workplace. So yes, we have to look for better approaches, and we live in the age of big data. And yet most health and safety departments, I can tell you, are not leveraging AI. They're not even leveraging, online platforms or digital record keeping. And the training that health and safety people get if they go to a college, for instance, there is no standardized training, and most of it is based on a book that was conceived in the late 60s and written in the early 70s. That would be Bird and Germain, which is a very good book, and every safety program that we see today is based on the concepts in that book. They work. They've been shown to be effective, but they are very dated. The approach is very dated, because safety is about people, and the workplace today is much different than the workplace in the 1970s.
Well, certainly, my introduction to safety was through the DNV Loss Prevention Control Manual back, my goodness, it'd be mid-90s when I came across it. And it struck me, Dave, and I still look at it in this day and age, that, and I think it ties in as well with the education that is there. And I mean, you mentioned some names in previous episodes like Rasmussen and things, and my safety professionals have never heard of these people, and they're very much focused on the administrative tasks, the safety management system itself, and have forgotten all about the people side to it there. And there's just no education for them on how do we actually interact with people. There's no understanding of behavioral economics or social psychology of risk that is there, or even human organizational factors, in terms of how it shapes behaviors that occur. And I think that's an important part of things that are missing with it. And again, if I look at the safety profession, much like we should with, say, nursing, I mean, they're educated in experimental design. They have a good understanding of statistics. They can read, scientific peer-reviewed type papers. And my safety professionals aren't there, which maybe is why they glom onto the latest, snake oil type fad thing and try to run with it.
Yeah, I think you make a good point there. I've always said there's a huge gap between what academics know and what health and safety people do. There are some really good papers out there, some good learnings, and these are generally academics that are doing studies, but that doesn't get pulled into the educational side for health and safety people. Almost all of the education is based around the bureaucratic or kind of the administration of a health and safety system. That's great. That's something you need to know, but it's stretching a bit to look at what the leading thought is on health and safety, and as you say, pulling in that social aspect, because it is about people in the end.
And maybe exactly. Maybe isn't that what Peterson said a long time ago? Safety is a people problem, and maybe they go back to that technical side of it because that's where they're most comfortable with it. And people, like, let's be honest, they can be messy. It could be challenging. But I think our academics, our researchers also need to help bridge that gap, because I mean, you've read peer-reviewed papers. Great way to fall asleep, right?
Yes. Yes, it is.
A lot of jargon. Understanding experimental design, having to read statistics. If you don't have that, you're never going to get to what is, and certainly you can't differentiate between a well-designed paper, that you should rely on, a piece of fluff that is there as well with it. So I think that comes to people like ourselves to help bridge that gap. But certainly we talked about some of the certification process. I know this is close to you as well. What do we need to do to help our safety professionals bring the value back into the organizations, deliver on that promise?
Well, I had some involvement a few years ago with INCHPO, the International Safety and Health Professionals Organization, and they created a framework that was really accepted internationally of competencies for health and safety professionals. That really hasn't made its way into the certification process in Canada. It hasn't made its way into the universities and colleges. So what's being taught is was great in the 1970s, and that's really what we're talking about. What's being taught is something from the 1970s, and as you say, critical thinking has to be developed. You can read a peer-reviewed paper, and what does that mean? When you're not questioning, if somebody's selling something and they write a peer-reviewed paper, that's really biased, and you have to recognize that. But by and large, health and safety people do not read peer-reviewed papers. They don't have access to them, and they'll read magazine articles perhaps, but those also tend to have an agenda or be biased. So it's very difficult to kind of penetrate that, I guess, that bureaucratic shell where we're concentrating on our processes and our procedures and our spreadsheets instead of going out and talking to people and seeing what's happening and gathering data.
This is tough, and you know, I mean, we've talked about this a lot. So I had an opportunity to put together a curriculum through continuing education with one of the universities, and it was going really well until it came to the point of saying, well, if they do this, are they going to be able to pass, in this case, the CRSP exam? And the answer was, well, no, but we're going to make the workplace safer. And they said, well, it basically kiboshed the whole thing, because if you go through this, you can't get a certification, it's going to make it harder for you to get a job, then what is the point? So almost had to reverse going, say, well, you were asking me to do something that's going to help pass the CRSP exam, but we're not going to make workplaces safer. So it's a complex issue. Where do we start with this? Is it like with the BC CRSP type thing, is saying you guys need to change it with the Canadian Society of Safety Engineers, is with our university? Like, how do we bring people together to say we have to do it differently? How do we bridge that gap?
Well, I think in these organizations that you mentioned, there's a whole bunch of myopia, really. And, you know, when you design training, I mean, I've designed a lot of training, and, you know, you start with what do people need to know? So let's take the people need to be able to pass the CRSP exam, and we need to build our training back off of that. And of course, there is the INCHPO framework. But that's not how it works. You know, so colleges and universities, you know, maybe bring somebody in and they say, well, it should be this or it should be that, or they include some existing courses. But, you know, the health and safety profession, if we're, you know, daring to call it that, you know, is fairly dysfunctional, because it's the only profession I know of where you can go and get a certificate or a diploma or even a degree from a university, and then you have to spend a bunch of time going to a prep course to take the exam, because you may not have learned what you needed from your university or college program. It's ridiculous. And in order to be successful, you know, because the exam is all about, you know, running or supervising or building a health and safety system, you know, but, you know, there are some aspects in there that just, you know, aren't covered. They're in the INCHPO framework, but they're not covered in the exam yet.
So what's your recommendation here, Dave? Is take the INCHPO framework, bring it in, try to get these various bodies to adopt some of these things?
Well, BCRSP has adopted the INCHPO framework. It just hasn't made it into the exam, or at least that's my understanding. I think, you know, the problem here is that there's some disconnects with these organizations, you know, and I think if health and safety is to move forward in this country, there needs to be an organization that represents the people working in health and safety. And there is no such organization. I know that's a daring statement, but, you know, when we look at the existing organizations, CSSE or whatever they're calling themselves now, and the BCRSP, they have a board of directors, but it's elected basically by the board of directors. You just, as a member, you can say, I agree with the selection or I abstain. So these organizations can't claim to represent anybody, and if you don't have people in the profession saying this is what we want, you should do this because we elected you, it's not going to go very far.
And I'm not sure if it's kind of the blind leading the blind in most cases here as well. And I think a lot of vested interests on that side too, you know, maintaining some of that status quo. And I think it's probably more than a 2-year continuing ed type program if you're going to bring in statistics and, you know, experimental design and, you know, the whole people side of things as well, psychology and sociology, some of the social sciences have to apply to it.
Well, I think, you know, one of the sore points that I have, you know, in terms of, you know, newly minted, you know, diploma holding, certificate holding health and safety people is they have no technical or professional writing in the program. And if you're communicating with senior management, you probably should be pretty good at that. And a lot of them don't even train people really on how to investigate incidents. And that's a key skill, and that's a key part of what health and safety people do. And it just really, you know, causes me pause when I look at it and say, why aren't people being trained in these things? I mean, we know they have to do it. We know that it's required. We know employers expect it, you know, and a good example is the latest, you know, cross-Canada move to say workplace harassment and violence is a workplace hazard. Health and safety people don't get trained on that.
Yeah.
You know, HR people end up doing it, I guess, because it has been in HR in the past. And so implementation and cooperation between HR and health and safety is, you know, not great. So that kind of, you know, goes a bit sideways. We should be equipping new health and safety people with the skills and knowledge they need to be successful.
I agree. I think it's probably part of that, and probably just to sum up, Dave, is how you started off. We have our practitioners, and those could be the people on the ground. We have our CRCPs that are more about the management system, and maybe you're talking more about the sociologist, psychologist sort of things that is talking about the whole culture piece and brings it all together, and have the ability to communicate with our senior executives on what's happening, the whole thing. And I know certainly when I was looking for advanced degrees in this, couldn't find it. Where does it exist? And it just doesn't at this point. So I want to thank you very much for being on the show, Dave. So let me know where people can get in touch with you, Dave.
I can be found on my website, rarebit.ca, or you can find me on LinkedIn.
So thanks so much for being on these episodes, Dave. It's been a learning experience for myself. It's always great to interact with you, and look forward to having a lot more engagement in the future.
That's a wrap on another episode of The Big Safety Short. Thank you for tuning in and empowering yourself with the knowledge to create a safer workplace. Until next time, stay safe and keep striving towards how we go about creating an environment that achieves excellence.